Okay, sorry. Um, so we got these guys in the Ukraine. It seems like the packet model's good for them, I would have thought,
Mhm.
because basically it's not an hours-based thing, it's a deliverable-based thing. If there's some disruption in your life, it means you can't make it to work that day. Big deal. It's kind of most of the guys are spread out over Italy and Poland at the moment, so we'll people are moving around a lot. Things are intermittent, all that. It seemed like a good model to me, but obviously I would be biased towards thinking that. So I'll just wait to see what the feedback they give on it is. The What you're saying is that scaling the QA seems to be the main pain point, but Anton was talking about he viewed the QAs as actually that's more like the team lead view
Okay.
role now, because QA is like normally QA is like the guy with the toilet paper wiping everyone's ass at the end of the process. But this
I
is
don't think so actually. I think it's deeper than that, man. I think it's like they're like what's the word? Sorry, it evades me at the moment right now. But they're basically the people that hold like both the work and the money until everything is solved, is settled, basically, right? So
yeah. It's a very powerful role, but it needs to be collaborative. Like part of the smart contract of QA reject. The QA reject function has to be supplied with information. You can't just reject for like you're being paid to provide insight and negotiation.
right,
Yeah, it is a powerful role. It's not you're not responsible for writing tests. You're more like oversight.
escrow is the word I was thinking of.
Yeah, they are in
Like
charge of the escrow. They're the escrow agent.
yeah, so like that, like politically, it can't be owned by either the buyers or the sellers.
That's right, and cannot receive any of the funding that goes into the packet. So they have to be
Right,
independently paid, and they have to be acting independently.
right. Yeah, so I mean, a team lead, like in my experience, a team leader, like a PM, would almost always be owned by the seller.
The seller. Who's the seller?
Like the labor, they would be owned by labor, not capital, basically, right? They'd be owned by the side that's like doing the work.
Right. But and then where the capital side always got left wanting because they never really had, their QA was often disadvantaged because
Mm-hmm.
they weren't intimately bound up in the knowledge, and so by
Mm-hmm.
putting the QA in no man's land or trying really hard to do that,
Mm-hmm.
both capital and labor can feel more comfortable about the predictability of the system.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it balances things more towards capital's side in
Mm-hmm.
terms of information, which allows the labor side to balance the capital rate more in their side. So labor can ask for more money because it's a finished thing, and capital can have more information because QA is unbiased.
Right. Yeah. My read on the idea that QA is nothing more than like team lead or PM is basically, that's a very like labor centric perspective, basically,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
right?
you're right. It's absolutely not that. It's something much more powerful.
Mhm.
I was more
And in
describing.
fact,
I think Anton was meaning the personality is more the team lead
right. Yeah.
personality. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Somebody that doesn't, they don't need to get their hands dirty. They just want to make sure that like everything's being marshaled correctly.
right, right. And so the payment scheme that I was thinking. So QA supplies also the share split of the solution. And I would expect that Anton, as the coordinator, would get a share split when the funding gets released. But I don't know if that's the best way to do it, because there's some corruption there. Because if Anton hired the QA,
Mhm.
then the QA is incentivized to make sure Anton's happy.
Right. Anton is proposing himself as the agent of labor, basically, right?
Well, I guess we were proposing him as that. I didn't. He doesn't code, but he's exceptional at connection making
Right.
and management of people of all professions. But he's not sales, because he's stuck in Kiev,
Right.
and he's not. He doesn't feel like a salesy guy. Like, he doesn't have the bullshit.
Right. I imagine even less so now than before, right? Like,
yeah, right.
so
Like, that's insane that we got this dev team that's been to actual war,
right.
and like coming back, and I'm sort of a little bit scared. I'm like, well, there's gonna be no fucking around now, because
Right.
they've killed people, and I'm like, do this right now, and it's just not going to have the same weight.
Right. But so I think that's actually where you'll get the benefit of like non-time based packets showing up a lot, right? Is like, I'm sure they're used to working a lot and hard, and if they see the benefit of just like grinding,
Yeah.
then like they can get even more than what they otherwise might be able to.
Yeah, and then there's also this thing of like devs strangely seem to love very clear, isolated, distinct instructions.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of like, hey, here's this problem, go solve it.
Yeah, to me, it's the blank canvas problem, right? The more constraints you have on a blank canvas, the easier it is to start.
Absolutely. So the thing I think what I'm expecting some pushback on is this notion that the packet is open to anyone, so it's unrestricted. And I guess what some of the mechanisms I was thinking of providing to cover that are like an insurance pool, so that like in exchange for a fixed cut of the funding of the packets, we can ensure you that you'll get paid for partial solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Because the theory is that there's two pressures that we think make a funder want to complete their packet. Number one is that software is always useful to someone else. And number two is the funder generally has a tight relationship with the teams. So they there's generally they want more than one packet. Like, they want, so their reputation matters and the relationship matters, and so the funder, I think the funder will be fairly reasonable. These are all the things, right? This is all the practicalities of implementing the system.
Yeah, there's another trouble you might want to look out for, I think, is like there's a natural incentive to form a consortium that distributes work internally, sort of like a mining pool,
right?
Which might not be a bad thing. Like a division of labor, makes things as optimal as possible, but it also reduces the amount of like novelty in the system
and the switchability of the system as well. It becomes hard to switch, and so there was two pre-money ways that I saw everyone getting paid. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the post-money way is through these royalty payments, but pre-money is number one, getting paid from the shares that the QA allocates within the funding, and number two is that, so if Scott's on the sales side and he's selling to UK companies that are pretty familiar with getting reamed for their day rates for devs to under-deliver in British pounds. So basically, he goes out and scopes a packet. We estimate what that packet's going to cost, and then we add in buffer or margin to it. And then the customer funds the packet. We then break down the work into smaller packets and fund them using our own capital, where the sum of our expended capital is less than the funded packet, with the difference being our margin. And so we can, instead of a mining pool that sort of locks onto the primary packet or the customer facing packet, let's call that the product, for lack of a better word, because that's the thing that gets sold external to the system.
Right.
Internal to the system, we would break down the work into these smaller and smaller units, so that some of these macro problems of rug pulls or target switch issues are less insulated, because we're saying that we will pay for the packet, end of story, and then we'll take the risk to be able to roll that up into the top level packet before the funder defunds the packet.
I like that. I was thinking the QA, you might want to provide some kind of mechanism where where they don't get paid until everyone feels like things have been fairly broken down and distributed and collected at the end. But that actually sounds better because it's faster. It's more upfront.
Sorry, what do you mean it's faster?
What you just said, like breaking down, like getting the margin by breaking things down. By doing the estimation and then breaking things down in a more efficient way. Like that actually sounds like a better way than waiting until the end for QA to kind of get their value assessed.
Oh, right. So because of the staging effect, so that QA is doing the share cut in these little packets all the way up, that should in fact give well, here's the thing, like the way that the assemblage happens would be that it was the packets, not the solutions, that would be presented as ways to close the top level packet. And so the share split would not be to people, it would be to packets. And then the share split of each individual packet goes to however the share splits are.
Right. So it's like you're proposing your final position in the outcome to anyone that wants to take on the solution.
I'm sorry.
You're saying like your share split goes to the packets rather than the people.
Oh, so, sorry. I'm saying that the share split can be when the way that I've modeled a packet is that it's if you just afford me like 5 minutes of going into the background,
you can have 20, you can have
6 minutes. So the way I've modeled it in the smart contract is a packet is constructed of a packet header, a packet payload, and zero to many solutions and each one of those is a transition. Transitions are all modeled the same. And the reason is that the mechanisms by which funding each transition occurs are the same. It's the only sort of thing that gets wired up in the solidity logic is that when some transitions change, they affect some other related transitions. And by that, I mean that, for example, if a solution changes from open to resolved, then that will change the packet transition into resolved as well. So it's no longer open for funding because it got solved by a solution.
Right.
Each transition requires QA to be involved, which requires QA to be funded or paid to process the transition. Each transition has a appeal period where the QA's ruling may be objected to and ultimately overruled. There can be concurrent solutions, there can be concurrent appeals, there can be there's a lot of concurrency in the system, given that it needs humans to ticket forwards for all these different reasons. So I've arrived on a system that I'm pretty happy with. There were a few oddities, but overall it seemed to work. And the reason why I'm saying this is that a solution has shares. So when you propose a solution, you're proposing a solution to a packet, and you're using the QA of the packet to process it.
Mm-hmm.
If there are concurrent solutions that were submitted during the appeal window or during that closed period,
mm-hmm.
then the QA must assess all of those before the packet is closed.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you can get is, if there are concurrent solutions that all have their independent different share splits, and after all the appeal windows have closed and it's all settled, those shares get smushed together to represent the total share split of the packet.
Even the non-accepted solutions?
The non-accepted solutions do not get any shares. But if there are concurrent or multiple solutions that were accepted to the packet, which, while it is an edge case, is a plausible one.
I think it's an important one, actually.
Yeah. And then the QA, once all the appeals on the share splits and all that have settled, the logic in the contract merely allocates the same weight to each solution. So if there were two solutions, then it just says half and half, takes the share tables of each solution, and then smushes them all together, and that's the share table of the packet.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Now that packet, particularly in the case where I just described, where you've got a UK-based customer paying for a product that's been broken up into individual component packets for work by the dev team.
Mm-hmm.
At some point in that tree, some packets can be solved by other packets. So a packet can be solved by either a solution or a packet, either a packet or a solved packet, where a solved packet contains solutions.
Okay. Is this just a way of breaking down work?
It's more a way of reusing, I suppose, or deduplicating. Because you're basically saying that I've made a rule that you can only submit a solution you can't reuse the solution to solve other packets, but you can reuse a packet. Otherwise, if you reuse the solution, it's sort of
theft.
Well, it doesn't let the funders of the packet receive any attribution.
Oh, I see. Right. It's it's
IP theft.
It's one step away from the attribution, right? It's like a
you short circuited it. You double dipped or you double spent the IP.
So the idea is you need to, if you want to reuse a solution, is there value to like pointing to it? If you're the type of person who's just watching the network and sees what things would solve other problems, I think it's very valuable to actively say that thing would work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I guess you're pointing out some things I need to capture in the model, which is that I guess it's better to make a solution able to wrap a packet, because there should be a share split for the person that introduced the connection.
Right.
As well, because that's difficult and valuable.
I think that's actually some of the most valuable work that can happen in the ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's reuse. So yeah, that person. So okay, so I'll change that area of the model to be that a solution can wrap a packet, and then when that solution, if it gets accepted to solve a given packet, then that solution will have its own independent share table that will include the proposer of the packet as well, because there's also like the funding shares of the solution proposal, like the people that paid for the QA deserve some attribution too, because that's money, right? And
right, I almost wonder if you wouldn't, if you were occupying that role of trying to encourage reuse or encourage this to be picked up in a new context, if you wouldn't tell the funders, that they're like trying to solve a problem of another funder that you know.
Oh, I think that's part of the advertisement scheme. I mean, that's the model of the packets with margin that we were just talking about. And so like, for example, we would fund the component packets, and then we'd bundle them all up and present that bundle as a solution to the product packet.
Right.
And then when that funding gets released, we'd expect it to go to us as the funders of the packets that the devs did, but also in some way go to the devs as well, you know, like, because it's like, well, if they all came in under budget, shouldn't they get some of that funding? You know, so it's sort of like a bit like a bonus or an incentive scheme to them, so that they don't think that we're just sitting there creaming it.
Yeah.
Because no one likes that, right? But it's like, who makes that choice? Because that becomes like QA being quite in a bit of a hot seat.
Yeah, which, I mean, QA, I would expect QA, the way you're describing it right now, is going to immediately try to be captured by capital.
Well, yeah. And the thing that balances it is reputation and disposability. Because if the devs see packets that are linked to a certain QA pool and they're like, fuck, that guy has been captured, then no work gets done. So, but does that sound right to you, though, that like you'd have this fat packet at the top that the customer funded, and then all the individual packets, when the product packet is resolved, the funding goes out and is split to the funders of the component packets and the labor of the component packets as a bonus.
100%. I proposed the same thing to you a long time ago. I found the diagrams recently in my iCloud. The breakdown is very valuable work, right? And like the QA performs a natural role of fan out, right?
Fan out, yeah.
And fan out like makes or breaks the entire game, basically. You know, I think it's very, very valuable work to say, like, this part of it we can reuse something else. This part of it is novel, and we need someone new to do it. And like when we reassemble it at the end, like, you know, these are the component pieces that we reassembled, and this is how it solves your problem. I think a lot of like the people financing stuff are going to be, they don't care about those details, but they just care about a working solution.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, um, I kind of view that as like recursion, basically, like it's solution recursion.
Right.
Um,
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you agree, and I will refine the model
mhm,
to do that solution wrapping the packet
mhm.
so that there is attribution for the wrapper, the the one that wrapped. Okay. And then that sort of means then, just thinking about it now, that QA, if QA is allocating the shares of a product packet to the component packets
Mm-hmm.
without the attribution algorithms, now we've asked QA to make that most difficult of decisions, which is what is the value of labor compared to money, right? Because if they're saying, well, so I can take a product packet and I can split it into the shares of the component packets, that's easy. But now that the component packet has received income,
Mm-hmm.
how should the income be split? Is like the question I was trying to defer until we had a little bit more computational power and data.
Right.
But in this model, which is by far the cleanest model I can think of, because the other one involves, what you said, a pool that captures the product. Like there is no other way to model what we're talking about, right?
I can't think of one off the top. I don't even think it's like
Fan out's natural. It's
yeah,
like how you'd solve any problem like this in a different space. But as soon as money comes into it, it's awkward.
right. And I mean, which piece is most important, which person's time was most important. That's super subjective.
That is what QA was supposed to rule on, because
Mhm,
I think that is possible,
mhm.
and there's the appeal process for people to, say objections. As a side note, would love some input from you on whether or not things like project management should be included in that split, or if you can think of a different way. And then ultimately, where does the salesman cut go? So yeah, there's all these. There is no better way than fan out, right? Like I just can't. It's pure packet. Like it is using the system. It's not like, okay, that's where packeting stops, and now we're into this traditional sense of I pay you, you work for me
Right.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. You might want to think about a trivial case where you don't need to fan out, like where you just like
Direct tasks.
where everything is degenerate, kind of, right? Like where you get one task from the funder, and it is a task that you can do as like labor, basically, and then just slowly expand from there to like who are the middlemen and how do you prevent too many middlemen. I think fundamentally the problem that like most of these systems suffer from is too many middlemen, like too much of a rentier culture.
Yeah, and then yeah, and it's also a lot of middlemen that you can't see,
Right.
and you don't know what they're up to, and it's all sort of wrapped up in a black box, and everyone thinks they need the box,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but they don't, right?
So you want the model to like admit all of the detail as much as possible anyway,
Admit the
right?
details. Yeah. And so, for example, we'd go into a sales pitch where we're like, okay, hey, here's this task. Now we think it's going to cost £200,000. In there, this is the salesman's fee if it delivers, right? So all we're saying is you put your money in, and if we don't deliver, then you get your money back. So
Is the salesman when you think of like the users on the system, like the salesman is trying to attract paying customers, or is the salesman trying to attract? Like there's a lot of different things you can try and sell. You can try and sell labor. You can try and
So
sell capital.
in this case, he is trying to sell labor. He is not
Right.
trying to sell finished software. He is
Right.
trying to broker capital to fund labor. So he's sort of more like a broker, but he's selling the services of the network of people.
Right. So that person needs to be addressed by QA somehow. Like you need to assume there's a role in the system that is the balance between labor and capital, right? And that person needs to deal with anyone that would try to speak on behalf of both.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the way I modeled the contract is that the contract itself was ownerless, and each time a QA is specified, it's a external contract, which means that you can pick a different QA for a different purpose. So if you were making a product packet, you might choose a QA that's specialized in allocating fairly between labor, capital, and different types of labor, like project management, sales, all that kind of thing. Whereas if you were making a dev packet, you might choose a dev QA because they know about Rust, or they know about Python, or something like that. And it'll be like the contract represents a pool of people that provide a service. We don't care how. Their only functions, the functions that they have the right to do, is approve or reject.
Right. So what you're more or less saying there is you regard, and I agree with you actually, PM and sales as a form of labor.
It is. Everything's labor unless it's money.
Right. And that's fine. I think you're right. You would have I think what you ultimately need to think about then is how you create like an hierarchy of QA to properly handle the breakdown from bulk kind of coarse-grained thing through to like picking up sales.
Is that not the packets?
I think it is.
And it's actually, you're sort of like segmenting the packets by the QAs and by the type of thing that they do.
Right.
Right. Whereas the QA that would have to ultimately broker the fundage split between the salesman and all the devs would be a different type of a person than the person assessing if the React component was complete.
Right. So, I mean, I can imagine just kind of a working example here of a QA that got a big project, like build me an airplane. And they're saying, like, I'm willing to offer 10% of this project to anybody that can demonstrate to me that this team knows how to build an airplane, that the team that they're trying to sell me knows how to build an airplane. Right. And then that person would be the salesman, and they would get their cut. And the people that they introduce further would probably have their own version of a QA that would be like a QA for the subtask.
Right. But that's completely independent from that top level task, right? Because that's a packet, and it's just like you either solve it or you don't. You get paid or you don't. How you do it is completely up to you. Okay, that sort of sounds like a workable system that doesn't introduce hierarchies other than packet hierarchies. I think
they will, packet hierarchies. That's right. That's exactly
packet hierarchies is good. Internal system hierarchies are bad.
Right, because the way I see it, the ultimate value of the system would be, it naturally splits down work so fine-grained that it's very easy to see solutions that already exist in the ecosystem that can be swapped into this.
Yeah, right. And more importantly, to have your solutions reused elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And if we introduce this concept that, which I'll admit I hadn't thought about before until you brought it up, that an hierarchy of packets will need the QA to make a decision between, there will need to be an attribution function included very early on, which is the split between labor and money. Now, how the fuck are we going to do that? We don't have any data, and we're running in an EVM, which can't do shit. So I could introduce another type of actor, which is the attributor, and the attributor is not QA. It's attribution is their role. And so when a packet gets their role only comes in when a packet receives attribution. So when the product packet closes or resolves, those funds go out to everyone, which means that some packets that had already been resolved that were used as components in the solution are now getting their first like post money event where they're getting paid for. Someone needs to say how that split goes.
Yeah. So it's Mechanical Turk, right? You build the role that you hope the AI will eventually replace.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But the problem is that role is going to be that role is the one that actually holds all of the power in the system.
Yeah. Well, no, it holds all of the post money power, not the pre money power. The pre money power is very QA. Well balanced. Well, no, because QA is not fund. Money and capital are on opposite sides of the fence, whereas in attribution, money and capital are together on the same side of the fence, having an argument about how much of the scraps they each get.
Right, yeah.
Which is a different kind of a battle. So, okay, well, let me propose something then. The original system of the Dreamcatcher had this actor called a buyer, and the buyer was always going to be asked for 3 numbers. So, hey, you've chosen to buy this thing that was constructed via a packet hierarchy. How many? Here's the amount that you're paying. We need 3 numbers from you. The first number is how much goes to the capital that paid for the packet you've consumed, how much goes to the labor that produced the packet you've consumed, and the third one is how much goes to the dependencies that this packet relied upon. Now, what I can allow then is that the funders of the product packet could say how they saw the funds being distributed throughout the system as the first, because it is their money, or was their money until it was resolved, and so they could indicate or have some weight in the system as to how they wanted that resolved, which makes the buyer function less of a explicit function and more of a positional function, where depending on where your packet is in the hierarchy, you have you are the buyer of another packet.
I don't know that I like it being exclusively in the hands of like the money providers, right? Because I actually
who should hold it.
So I like the split there. Like, how much do we owe history? How much do we owe the people that did the work? And how much do we owe the people that
the capital, the capital, the labor, and the history? Yeah.
But if you're going to give all 3 of those as outputs, to me, it feels fair to make all 3 of them able to say what they think the split should be.
Right, but how would you choose then if these were their opinions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fraught thing. I don't really know.
This was not the problem. I wanted to dodge this problem. This was like the communist issue.
So what if you just did until an AI can come up with a better ratio and with more specific guidance, it's just one third.
Oh, that's awful. That is sorry, that's not an informative answer. Let me try again. What I was going to say about the admission of the process of the hierarchy would be that, for example, I sell something to somebody in the UK, and I say, look, here's how our structure is going to be. I'm going to take 10% as the sales guy because, I do all these other things. I run around and make this happen. So if this gets resolved, I need to pay my bills, and I had to sit here smiling at you and actually I hate you. So I need this much money. And then the rest of it, we would say, because that packet stops there, right? Because each packet is discrete, there's this next round of operating that is where we take our own money and we fund the component packets to occur. Now, we could say, to make that transparent, that we're like saying, well, we've got a target operating margin of 15%. And so we allocated our funds against those components to leave us with a 15% margin. So, and this can be how we would say that the funds from the product got distributed, is that we'd look at, say, all of our previous efforts, because some will be under target, some will be over, and we take that amount, and then we say that the funds go, 15% go to us, the capital, and then the 15% to us, as well as the amount that we expended to get the components built. Anything above that then gets distributed out to all the workers.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like you want to,
you formularize it.
Yeah, you want everybody to feel like they're getting like theirs and then some, right?
Theirs and then some, right? They're sharing in the upside of the system, and we as the capital don't want to get screwed because we're like under target all the time. We want the history of all our projects to be summed, and we want the dispersal of the product funds to be known to the person who's funding it, so that they don't feel like they're getting ripped off by anyone in the system, because the targets were always open.
Right. What I was trying to drive at is just like for the sake of fastest possible learning for any kind of like AI that you would attach to this to learn, the best thing you could do is randomize the split, so then measure the satisfaction afterwards, right?
That's an interesting idea, but
it would create a lot of
the satisfaction is not tempered at all. The satisfaction score depends on how loud you can be, not how satisfied or dissatisfied you are.
Sure. So whatever proxy for satisfaction that's tempered. Like, I don't know. I don't actually, that's something I'm going to need you to sit and think about a little bit.
Yeah, well, because you're asking a question that I hadn't considered a system goal, which was satisfaction. I had never tried to incorporate satisfaction.
Well, what trains the AI?
I had imagined it was buyers. So buyers of end products, because they can say that they give you those three numbers because they are genuinely disinterested, right?
Oh, when you say buyer, you mean end user, customer.
End. Yeah. So the situation we're talking about here is this fan out model, or the staging model, where it's still not making an end product. It's still supplying labor, but using the capital labor packet model thing to break it down. So we're still in the build side of it, which means that we're still in the capital exploitation side of the model too. But the buyer just simply wants the end thing, and should arguably be far greater in number than all the participants in the build side. Like, it should be like, a good product should be like at least 10,000 to 1 of buyer versus builder or funder, and
Right.
then they also can be reasonably disinterested in anything but fairness. Like they kind of don't, you know,
Right.
capital is
So
distorted all the time.
what you're saying is you want capital to act as a proxy for the buyer before the
Yeah,
product is
yeah,
complete,
which
right?
doesn't sit right with me.
No, no,
It
no. It
doesn't.
actually, it's right. It's right. It's
It
just
is
like
right.
what you haven't closed the loop. You haven't said like the capital actually belongs in that role, but what they need to do it properly is a sense of like whether they're paying for something that someone actually wants, right? So what they need like as the capital provider, what they really need is like a clear connection to the end users who want things, right? They're a good proxy for those, right?
Right,
That's what
right.
a product team normally does. That's what a product team normally does in a software organization is they go out and they survey the intended market,
Yeah,
and they like they come up with an idea of what they want,
right.
and then they present it to the stakeholders, and the stakeholders say, yeah, like build that basically, right? And like that keeps everyone on the same page. That keeps all the alignment in the system.
Yeah, I've yet to see that work successfully, but yes, I agree with you on the theory.
Mhm. So where the breakdown is, in my opinion, is there's always a middleman that's sitting and reducing the the problem you have when you go and start asking people what they want is you get way more information than you can handle, right?
Right,
And someone needs to kind of artfully reduce that information down into something that's like, this is the thing that will make money.
right. And that was what the buyer plus the three numbers was meant to be, because buyers can pre-purchase things that don't exist as well,
Right.
which is an even more accurate
Right.
way of getting that information, because they say what they want, how much it's worth, and
Right.
how much they think the split should be as well.
Right. In that case, that's great for an investor because you're just like, oh, there's a huge pool of people that want this. I'm going to come be a force multiplier for it and make it
Yeah.
happen faster, right?
Okay, so you're saying that in the case of a product packet versus component packets,
Mhm.
um, where let's say we were the component funders, we would be acting like venture capital, satisfying a buyer who was the product packet funder.
Mhm.
And so therefore the product packet funder is very well positioned to tell us how they think the funds should be dispersed between capital and labor.
Right. You're like a proxy buyer. You're basically proposing what a solution might be to a class of buyers to see whether or not they react to it. And then, like, when they do react to it enough, like, you invite capital to come in and force multiply.
Okay, so to take that back a step, what you're saying is before the product funder has even put their capital in, they should have surveyed the market and got some indication of what people get or want.
I don't know how investors actually think, but I would never invest money in something that I didn't like at least try to think about whether somebody wants this thing.
Right.
Yes, I'm saying yes, basically. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Uh, okay, and so fuck. Let me just try to get my head around this. So at what point in the system does the signal enter for that split? Because here was my mental model of how that attribution goes. Right, is that
Mhm.
by making it the buyer, and giving those three numbers, you also provide them the opportunity to break out the tree arbitrarily deep, and then also twiddle those numbers at any point in the tree of history as well.
Mhm.
So you can basically correct errors in the supply chain or discrepancies that you see in the supply chain, even though they're n levels deep.
Mhm.
You can, as the buyer, your signals can hit any point in the tree,
Mhm.
right? And so anytime there's some kind of perceived injustice, you can go and do it. Now, that's all well and good, but you can't. The idea was that because there's many buyers, first of all, you've got the law of large numbers on your side to stop there being any unfair things going on. But secondly, I wanted to temper or anchor or sway the final outcome based on some sort of a data-based system that looked at all the data across all the other places where it had been done, and then further tempered the result or dampened the result so that it was sort of approaching global fairness as opposed to just. So first of all, it's not just this buyer, and then it's also not just this buyer of this product. It's like all the buyers everywhere interpreted using some hoo-ha magic, then all the buyers of this product, and then that one buyer, and that's how the ultimate split gets done. Now, the problem with the product packet is that it's a one-shot thing.
Right.
How do you get one shot right? Like that's like 3 numbers, one shot, that's it. Like that can't be, it couldn't possibly be right by virtue of the fact that it's only done once. Like it's guaranteed wrong.
So the question I have for you is like number one, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that organically go and like navigate through all the proposals in the world and say, I want that. Like, here's how I think that would be allocated fairly. I think that like consumers are, as much as I want to empower them with like all of the information in the world, I think that they ultimately only care whether their needs are satisfied or not. And like,
well, okay, I disagree with you there, but I'll come back to that later because I think it's not important to your point.
Mm-hmm. Normally, if you wanted to get information from that person, the buyer, before the thing that they're buying exists,
right,
you would need some kind of a marketing person in the system, right? Like you would need somebody who like is out there kind of like actively
like a researcher of sorts.
Yeah, a researcher, product person, marketing person, like, someone that's either trying to drive hype, drive interest, or someone that's trying to understand an unaddressed market.
Okay, well, I've got another idea for you then to solve this problem. It's definitely a one-shot problem. What you could ask for is that if you put an actor in the system that was the attributor,
mm-hmm.
and that before the venture capital came on the scene and funded all of the component packets, the attributor was locked beforehand. So the funder of the packet
mm-hmm.
would negotiate with the venture capitalists, in this case us, to be like, what is a good attributor model for this packet ahead mm-hmm. of time? And it would be something like, okay, well, we want a target rate of 15% on our capital for funding all these things. We also got these concurrent projects in place, so we want to factor in our losses across them and spread them. So here's a loose formula that can be computed on chain in Solidity. That is this is the attribution split. If we are to go ahead with this, with doing these component packets for you, the person agrees, and then we can start doing the capital because we know how that those 3 numbers are going to come down. So we get some data. Everyone else can see how it's going to go down. So they're incentivized to work fairly for it. Does that sort of...
So, I mean, ultimately, like, would you say that the attribution, like, do you think that the attribution is ultimately up to the end consumer?
Ultimately, and the reason I say that, my disagreement with your point that consumers are dumb, is the fact that I will agree with you that they mostly only care about their own needs. I am a consumer. You are a consumer. We all have, right? And then what happens is things pop up in the news like, oh, Nike's been making shoes with kids' labor again. And we end up wanting to do something about it, but not having the tools. So I disagree that consumers are dumb and they don't care. I think they don't have the ability to make a good energy trade for their effort versus the impact in comparison to their daily needs, which is shit, I need some nappies or some shoes. And so by allowing the buy function to provide a tree that was arbitrarily deep of corrections in the capital labor history split, you can first of all allow any individual to pinpoint some part in the supply chain that they want corrected.
Right.
But more importantly, what I hope will happen is that consumers in bulk will subscribe to whitelisters or people whose business it is to audit these supply chains and look for discrepancies and publish corrections that they see fit. And then the consumers are just spending according to the UNICEF whitelist or the WWF whitelist or the thing like that. And so they're lending them their weight to an entity that they trust to be paying attention to these things that loosely reflect their values. So that's why I think that the tool has to be available in some form. It's a rich data set to draw on. And I think that it will get used by way of agents as opposed to used directly.
Yeah, I think you're actually right. I think like consumers do this, but they get a very coarse-grained tool, which is like buy or don't buy, right?
Which is right. And especially when you're like, well, shit, man, I need these things and I don't have enough money. And, you know, it would cost me $100,000 to fix this issue. I don't even have a spare $10. Like, you know, what does anyone expect them to do, right?
Right. Okay. So, I mean, if that's something that they're allowed to do whenever they make a purchase, and I think that the agent model is actually really sharp, it's really smart. What you're saying is the attributor role is like is meant to like act on their behalf in their stead before they've started spending money on things, right?
Yes, correct. You're right. Absolutely. That is what the attributor role is. And we do know from our discussions that the attributor role needs to be acting in override mode when your data set is small and the product is new. But so long as that attributor ultimately hands over to some kind of a neural network that was trained on all this purchasing data, it's sort of like the idea is that phase one would be like the one-shot mode where it's like, okay, well, we all need to agree that the attributor is going to work like this for this initial production of these packets first, or we're not moving. Fine. Stage two is we are now open to buyers who are purchasing an end product to configure how some of that split works according to these base rules, but also incorporating some of their feedback. And then phase three is a threshold was met, and now we are flicking over to fully neural network based attribution.
Right. So what I'm saying is what I'm thinking here, hearing you say this, is like the attributor is basically it's like a buyer oracle. You should actually it should exist in the system that in a way that like allows, you know, overview type roles like QA to be able to query it in order to come up with like, you know,
you should be able to query it and know what's going to happen,
right?
Deterministically, right? And you're like, well, I can also explore these different models. Like, let's say this particular component packet overshoots. That's going to really fuck my split. You know, like there's all these ways that you can do what if scenarios on what could affect that payout, but it's something that you can at least put in place so that everyone working on the system can be like, I'm part of a team. I have my individual packet. If I complete this packet, that's good for me. If my team wins, that's good for me too. And then if the customer wins, that's really good for me, right? So that's like a much more wholesome sort of a thing, right? It's not like turn up, sit in your seat, get paid.
Yeah, I think a person could even do that role as long as they didn't have the power to set the agenda, and they didn't have the power to control the flow of capital, basically. Like other than
so you're saying that the attributor role
input.
could be a human.
I think it's actually, I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I feel like I even believe in the AI that you're describing more after this conversation than I did before it. If you were to have it serve that function of basically being an audience proxy, right?
Right. So are you saying then that there is a role for the attributor to be a person? For
Until it's replaced by an AI, basically.
Why though? In those three phases, there's no. Which phase would the human act in?
Well, I mean, so when you're saying you want to build a role for it, in order to, when what I hear you saying, I might be wrong, is like you want it to be politically independent of everybody else because it's the one that's deciding the like the final flow of money, right? Like
it's deciding the split between capital, labor, and history. Which, when you reduce history down, history is just made up of those three numbers over again until you reduce down to just capital and labor. So it's really the attributor's role is fundamentally to choose to value human effort, right? As if there was a more contentious role to ever fill. And and this model is designed to provide us some crutches to sort of limp our way through until we have enough data to be able to do that in a data-based way.
So do you not think that it makes sense to have, because what I think is that before you can replace it with an AI, you're going to need to make a lot of wrong guesses, right? And I think that the thing that would give you the most wrong guesses is a person, right? Or I mean, a set of people. Like, what I think is that a person or a set of people filling that role will give you like a set of seed data for the AI that like actually.
Correct. Yeah, that role is supposed to be the people that you're speaking of there are supposed to be the buyers, because they are the only ones that can truly be independent or disincentivized or disinterested in any other outcome other than fairness. Because if you were to make it an oracle that sat on chain, who would pay them to do? Who would even pay their chain fees? Who would pay them to look at the data and make some calls? You know, how would the objection work? I don't think the attributor can be a person ever. I think that the attributor is always a formula,
right?
And in the pre-fund time, so before the product packet has been funded, the attributor is put forwards as a formula that is part of the negotiations to fund the packet.
Okay.
And so it's like, hey, here's how the money split versus labor split's going to go. If you agree to this, then we'll come in with our funding and split up the work even more, and which is really just externalizing and admitting the internal company structures that happen within a contracting company, because they're like, we'll supply you 10 devs for a month, and at the end of the month you owe us this much money, and each dev costs X per hour and they will work X number of hours. And so we're doing that, but with transparent components.
Right.
At that point, if you're pre-agreed on what the attributor should be, there's no need for a human in the attributor role at that stage. Can you help me understand more what you're getting at? I feel like I've gone off piece there.
I don't think you have. I think I'm just still grasping at it here a bit. Like the only time that this role is needed is before real money is actually flowing in the system.
Well, right? No, actually, and if you, the only time that this role is needed always
Mhm.
but nobody can be trusted with it at any stage, I think.
Right. So it's
and so the
basically,
buyers.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
So the attributor's role is to give a fair enough guess
Fair enough. Yeah.
fair enough guess at what the money outcome will be if the software ever gets working.
Correct.
And then it will eventually be replaced by people actually purchasing things and making the decision about what they value.
Correct. And further than that, it will finally be ultimately and irrevocably replaced by a neural network that sampled everyone buying everything that we can get our hands on, and then applying that back to this model.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think the only thing is, before you can have this unknowable intelligence doing it for you, that means there's always going to be someone proposing the formula, and the formula is going to be obviously skewed in one direction or another.
Right, but the fact that it's open is a start. Keeping these splits private gives the middleman power. So in the company dev shop model, I would be negotiating with the customer of my services, and I would be inflating everyone's hourly rate. And how do I know this? Because one of the first questions I asked at all of the dev shops that we went to was, can I tell your devs how much you told me they cost an hour? And the answer's all and the answer's always, please don't.
Yeah,
right?
I hired my friend through a dev shop, and he, when I told him how much the contract cost, he quit.
Right.
He was working for a dev shop, and it's 100%.
And so there's an information boundary put around the dev shop owner and the customer, and then there's another separate between the dev shop owner and the devs. And I'm saying, well, that's where the unfairness comes, because the dev shop owner is extracting more than is fair from the system, and which makes the whole system as a whole suck, which actually benefits the dev shop owner in the short term, but he doesn't get access to the ongoing royalties that the customer might be prepared to share if he was being more open and his role diminished.
Yeah, so in that case, I think I agree with you completely, as long as everyone involved in both labor and capital is capable of seeing what the formula is.
Right. I think that's actually that is 100% what I always had in mind, but the fact that you've singled that out as being the most important factor, I think, is important to note. So, to recap, the attributor is a function provided by the system that initially is provided as a series of proposals from people, where everyone in the system can see it and knows how it works. But because this is the first time that this particular path of capital to labor has ever been taken, it's impossible to get that right. And so this is just a fair enough cut based on what everyone can see at the time. Right? Then, secondly, after that initial process runs and some buyers of the end product come on the scene and start indicating how they would see that split to go, then the flows in from the buyers is altered by the data from the buyers plus this initial formula that was agreed on to some pre-agreed decay function.
Right.
And then ultimately, once we have enough buyers from enough different independent executions of this model, we can then incorporate the trained result that substitutes or evens or smoothens all the buyer inputs
Right.
to be the long-lasting, long-running version of that.
In fact, it suggests a really like good training pipeline. If the
That's the
attributor
training pipeline, yeah.
if the attributor has the exact same interface to suggest corrections that the buyers do, then
Yes.
what you're looking for is the formula matching what the buyers do.
Right. And then you can, next time you do the next pre-contract attributor, you can use what data you've got already and be like, well, this is what our data set, as best anyone knows so far, says that the pre-contract should be. And so, we can change that or not change that, and people are free to negotiate whatever they want there. But, ultimately you'll be able to get an automated score that, hey, you're pretty far off, or you're, this or that. So there's already some multi-shot weight. The multi-shot weight is starting to pull upon the formula already, which is what we want, right? When it's one shot, I mean, fuck.
I mean, if you let it run long enough, the idea is that it should be impossible to make an unfair deal at any point in the system.
Right.
Which is
I think, it's deeper or more efficient than that. It should be that you don't even have to think about how to make a fair deal once this system is running. You just do it because you trust that this system is the best fucking fairest thing that you've ever seen. So don't even bother debating it or trying to jerry rig something else. Just go right in there. That's really the ultimate goal, because the time that you spend trying to negotiate even this shit is going to take us a lot of time per contract. It'd be easier to just go.
Yeah, it's blocking humanity from advancing. It takes so much time, right?
Yeah, because we can't agree on who gets the credit for it.
It's also really, really attractive for consumers. Right? It's saying ultimately you are the only voter in the system.
Correct. Yeah, you'll ultimately, yes, we had to make some choices to get started, but your numbers are so great that you will dwarf those initial conditions completely over time.
Right, and it's like with a much more fine-grained system than just like vote with your feet, right?
Yeah, it's highly precise. Okay.
No, I like it. I really like it.
Okay, this is good. That's a good level of detail too. Like, making this contract has sort of made me dig into it way more than just like the theoretical, hey, this could be cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So where were we? I think we were talking about the how this Ukrainian dev team would work, and I think we pretty much solved that, right? If there's a sale in the UK of services, that sale also includes a commitment to an attributor formula, which will detail basically like a bill of materials, but says how everyone in the system is going to get paid, or how a formula is going to be used to pay them. Right. And once they have funded that packet, we will come in with our own funding to fund the components, knowing that if we solve the main one, we have XYZ attribution guarantees. And then when the QA does the relative labor comparisons, they will include the project management cuts in there as well. Is not the comparison between different types of labor somewhat similar to the comparison between money and labor, and therefore should be subject to an attributor?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question in my mind. I think that this is answering the question that I think has been the hardest one I've ever encountered, which is like, how valuable are soft skills? Right? Like, it's easy to count hard contributions when people
they're
are
all the
following
same.
some sort of rigorous formula about how they do process, right?
Right. If it's all the same type of contribution, right?
Mm-hmm. And even more than that, it's metered in the sense that like a commit is a commit, right? Like most commits are going to have 10 lines of code in them. Most commits are going to like affect one area in the code. It's very easy to like count developer contributions.
Right. But like how much did the T lady get, or what was the project management cut of each commit? Okay, so then I'm going to make some assumptions on what you're getting at here, and say that actually there should be an attributor function agreed to even in these component packets that pays the
guy that hung the suicide nets at Foxconn.
Or the guy that cleared them.
No, okay. But yeah, I think that belongs under attribution too, because I think there's a lot of people that kind of grease the wheel, right?
Yeah,
that you don't think about.
Yeah. I know. So should then the project manager get paid as part of the attributor of the product packet rather than each individual component packet? Because that sounds like a bit of a, like, the less places that the attributor can be run in the one-shot mode, the better. Because one-shot's hard, and like there's more room for dispute. Like each time the attributor runs in one-shot mode is a room for dispute or appeal.
Right. So you don't want to run it the whole time you're breaking down the work tree. You kind of want to run it as high up in the work, like in the task.
That's a good point. That's a good point. You could run the same formulaic attributor as what's in the target, the product packet. You could just run that on the lower packets and be like, well, it's all under the same banner because this is where the funding was trying to get us to.
It does get a little bit hairy when you're trying to reuse stuff, because like, if something already existed in the past and was funded like under a different attribution model, like,
right,
should you use the old one? Should you use the new one? Should you combine
there's an incentive to use the new one so that you can get paid.
It's more that like, I think that they'll all try and include some sort of sense of history, right? But if your old one used a different sense of like who was valuable than the new one uses, then like if you're trying to reuse work, right? Like if some packet in the hierarchy of packets is already done, basically, like should it use the old attribution or should it use the new attribution?
Well, there's no attribution due because it's done.
Right.
Like, sorry, it's oh God, that's a different question. Should venture capital funding have to pay as though it purchased previous stuff, or should it only go on making new things?
Yeah, like that's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, do you think that the VCs actually owe the people that made React money?
Surely they only owe them if their product works. Like if their product doesn't work, it seems unfair to stifle the system by requiring that they pay whether they win or lose.
So the attributor doesn't attribute things that are coming into the new packet, like breakdown by reference, but the buyer still can, right?
History. Okay, so the initial attributor might have a very restricted history payment.
Or, yeah, I mean,
or maybe should it have zero history?
Maybe history doesn't matter for the because it should only care about. Well, it gets hairy, right? Because like, what if I'm going to take a library and modify it a little bit on the interface in order to plug it into the new output?
That's new code. That's new stuff. That's labor. So that's
Right.
part of the attributor. Okay, so attributor, pre-money attributor history equals 0.
I disagree actually.
Oh no.
Now that I think about it a little bit, because what you want if the attributor is smart enough, it should be able to suggest ways that you can deduplicate your work, right? If it's trying to come up with a formula of like the best way to do things, it can also say this already does like 50% of what you do or what you want, right?
But if you turn up to some, I just don't think that paying out, even once you've built the things that you say you're going to do in the product packet, there's still no guarantee that it's going to make any money. Shouldn't you only have to pay history if you start making money?
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
And doesn't that suggest then a phase boundary where if you make enough money to break even plus some formula, at that point you need to start paying out to labor? Should you be entitled to should the funders be entitled to get their money out back first before labor starts getting royalty payments?
Yeah, actually, I think that's fair. And that's the way that debts are usually handled, right? The people who who funded the debt have the first claim on any sort of money if the situation breaks down, right? Yeah. Even money in, yeah, I think that's right. Until they're paid back, basically.
Right, because if you start paying the devs out before the funders have got their money back, is that our choice to make? Does that sequence have any bearing on what fair is?
I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like money can't do anything or capital can't do anything without labor, and labor can't do anything without capital, right?
Yeah. It sort of seems unfair to not be the same at every instant. Like, why should an early sale predominantly go to the VC? What if there were only early sales? Like, why should labor be last in line?
That's right. I mean, I think it's kind of part and parcel with the whole system you're designing.
Right, because then if we were to take a favoritism like that, I think the overriding problem is that it disincentivizes labor to invest through sweat. So charge less funding to do a better job. Like, if you're going to get paid last, you might as well just get paid most up front.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're also going to get worse quality output from people too.
Right. Because you get back to the same old, which is let's just get paid.
Right.
Because it'll be years until we get anything back. Okay, so the payment out should be it should be to labor as well as capital right off the bat.
Maybe throw a real monkey wrench in and pay labor first.
But when would you stop? Like, when has labor been paid enough? No, you were just being facetious.
Yeah, just being facetious. I think I actually think this is probably one of the things you want to let the attributor decide. Is priority, not only split but also priority. That's another part of it.
No, because priority is a stateful computation, which is stateful computations are the devil, and instantaneous computations are pure, right? Like they're great. You're like, here's the formula, here's the data, here's the output. But if you're like, and now we're gonna look at all of history,
right,
and then compute, you're like, oh.
Right. And figure out if this guy's been paid back properly or whatever. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think
the priority should never be it should never change over time. Like it should always be trying to compute fairness in the moment, not fairness for later.
Yeah, I think that's right for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And you can then do, after that, you can then do stateful computations like historical grievances and correcting imbalances in the system and all that. Like, so and so owned my granddad as a slave, and therefore I should have more than him now, or whatever. Like, those are not my problem to deal with. I don't know how you're going to fix that problem, but if we stick to instantaneous fairness, that's the safe ground to start with.
Right.
Absolute fairness, considering everything there is in history, is too big.
Yeah, and I think adding little like grievances in.
Yeah, and besides, like, sorry,
it's like you had a claim somewhere, and then everything points to like the thing after the claim, and then the claim becomes a part of the instantaneous computation, right? Like,
well, yeah, because the instantaneous computation is always going to be the starting point of the system, and then you can mutate it with these historical balances as well. But you still need the instantaneous thing to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the example of Scott gets a packet funded out of the UK, it's a £200,000 £200,000 packet. The attributor says that 15% is going to go to us, the capital, and we're going to spend money to complete that packet.
Mm-hmm.
If we go over budget and eat into our margin,
mm-hmm.
then the workers will get nothing of that fund dispersal, but they will get the funds that we put in to pay them for the work, and they will be due on the royalties that they get later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes it makes sense. It makes sense. It's just
these are hard problems, eh? Like these are like
yeah. No, I mean, I like the only problem I have with like funds being made up after the fact by like buyers is that buyers are allowed to make a different decision than the one that you think would make sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely, but that's they deserve that power.
They do. It's just there's no way of guaranteeing that things will be made up after the fact. Like,
oh, you're saying so if the VC fund overshoots, like, okay, there's several ways that would be made up without requiring the buyers to show any kind of mercy for the poor old VC.
Mm-hmm.
And
when you put it like that,
right? And so the first way is that the attributor ought to be calculated over all of the VC's efforts. So if you've got 10 concurrent projects, you can say, well, we actually ran over budget in the last 7 projects, and so we need to take out this much of this packet's funds to pay for our losses, and only then will any residue be distributed out to our other to the workers. So you can make the attributor be more than just this particular contract or project. You can make it multi-project. So that's one way that you can balance that out.
Okay. I have questions there, but keep going.
Yeah. What's the question?
Like, where does it stop, basically? Do you want the attributor to, like, do you want separate instances of attributors? Do you want like one instance
well,
of
the attributor is agreed upon between the product funder and the VC who's about to embark with them. So it can be different every time. the reason why I say it makes sense to do a calculation across all the projects is because it allows you to justify why you're taking a high cut, because you're like, well, these other projects I took a spanking in, and I need to make my money back, and it's still a good deal. Go find a better deal somewhere else. We're committed to this transparency model, and it's not working out right now, so I need to up my rate. That's that's what happens in a conventional business anyway, except you just can't see those calculations. You can't see if the dev company you're about to pay is going bankrupt. You don't know if they might, you just don't know any of that.
Right. They're all about to go bankrupt in my experience. I don't know how they could charge so much money and still be so insolvent.
I know. I know. Well, I'm sure we'll figure that one out along the road. But yeah, the attributor is a. Hang on, I just need to make a note. I'm sorry. So I was thinking that based on that attributor model, then I had been saying that the defunding delay on a packet is always like 3 days. But if you're about to go in as a VC, you might want to add some extra clauses to the funding that are like, hey, if you're going to defund, then there's like a partial payment due or something like that based on effort expended, or like some more complications to help us in the VC role not get left in the lurch if the customer's just like, sure, I don't want that anymore. 3 days notice and then the funds are out. Ouch. So yeah, but I mean, a counter argument to that is to say, well, the product packet should have been broken down small enough that getting yanked or defunded wouldn't make that much of a difference, and so you can avoid those kinds of complications. This is one of the big decisions that I kind of have to make. Is the defund period configurable, in which case it's exploitable, or is it just simply fixed?
Like it feels nicer to make it configurable to me, but
yeah, but nicer to who? It makes it biased to make it configurable, and then like with that influence whether or not you funded a packet based on what parameter someone chose for the defund. Maybe I actually think it should be all a fixed. Defund is just simply fixed. And
yeah, I can see that. I think it needs to be more than 3 days. I think it should be like a week or two.
1 week, 2 weeks.
To me, it feels like employment law at that point, right? It's like, how long is it fair for you to say to somebody you're employing, like, you're going to have to go find a new source of income.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So here's a thought experiment or scenario for you then. Someone puts up a packet. It's a big one. Like, it's going to take us about 6 months to deliver on it. They halfway through, no, right near the end, they hit defund. We haven't submitted a solution yet. The defund window is 2 weeks. During that time, we submit a partial solution for just whatever we've got right now, which causes the defund window to be paused, because now there's a solution that QA has to process in order to allow the defund to take place. What if QA is delayed? Because once a solution has passed the threshold of funding that the QA sets for being like it to be considered valid, it needs to have at least this much money in it. What if the QA was slow, and during that time, we used that time to come up with a further solution, which could sort of, like we caused the contract to hold the funder in there longer than they wanted to be by way of us manipulating the system.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that is a solid reason for a short period, because it's obviously a lot harder to pull that off if you have less time.
It's more the principle, though, I guess. Like what is fair, and I would argue that if you submitted a solution and it wasn't complete, the QA would process it and reject it. You miss out. You didn't get the thing done in time, or you attempted it. You knew all these things before you started, right? Like you knew the defund period before you committed resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so you should have been prepared to be defunded, or engage in an off-chain contract that says, hey, I am the funder of this packet, and I, using the legal system of the UK, contractually promise to you that I will not defund these packets until XYZ or under these terms.
Mm-hmm.
So, would that be a fix?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best fix would be to figure out a way to make it easy to get someone else in there funding the thing that's in flight if it's like useful, right? But that's kind of up to the labor to figure out how to like make their work valuable at that point. I mean, I guess like what fair to me rests like pretty squarely on like what does the funder own if they defund stuff? Not own. Own. I shouldn't use the word own because own is the thing that's being redefined here. But like, what rights does the funder have to like partial work?
If the funder didn't pay anything, the funder gets nothing.
Right.
Now, the attribution system in the future may determine that just by holding your money up there, you're due some attribution.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, the worker doesn't have to publish their work.
Right.
Like they'll be like, oh, it's been defunded. Oh well, tell you what, I'll go around promoting how useful it would be to have this thing done.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll find another funder, and then I'll submit my work and be like,
It's kind of I think there's already a bit of a natural benefit to the worker to be in a situation where they're in possession of something that someone said they wanted to fund. First of all, I would hope that like whoever's breaking down the work wouldn't just say, here, go ahead, do this $200,000 thing. We'll see you at the end of 6 months. Like that they would say, here's the like weekly.
Because no one's going to start on that, right? No one's going to start on that, and it's like that. No, I don't like. No, too risky.
Right. Yeah, for sure, exactly. But if they did want to start on it, it probably is a good idea. And like when they own 60% of a good idea, like, and even if the funding is yanked, like it should be like pretty easy to go and say, here's what happened. Like, do you want to pay 40% for this thing that would normally cost 100%, right?
Right. And then you could be getting exploited, like a funder's just trying to get a good deal because he's like, haha, I know that you've done this much. Mm-hmm. The options to you are, okay, first of all, once the system's working, I would expect that funding would come from multiple places. And so one person defunding is sort of a type of situation that is only going to occur in the early days of the network. Mm-hmm. Because like it's like a lot of one-off jobs, so there's only one funder. But ideally, it would be multiple places, so you can just defund at any time. Who really cares, right? But the second option is that QA would be trying to appraise partial solutions, which is something I'd originally tried to get away from. But you might want to tell me different now.
Yeah, I mean, I believe like strongly that partial solutions are more reusable than big chunky ones.
Right. I would also argue that a partial solution is the same as no solution because it ain't done until it's done.
Right.
And who knows, you might, like, were you 80% of the way through? Were you 90% of the way through? Does that mean that you have the other 90% to go? Like, that's the issue with a partially funded thing, right?
Right. Which is, again, where I think like breaking something down into smaller pieces and then giving them each their
That's
own
the key,
QA life
right?
cycle.
Yeah, that's the key. Yeah, that's the key. And so in the case of a completely unexpert funder, where the salesperson has sold them a big project, the salesperson should probably engage in a contract with them to ensure the funding period. And what's probably going to happen in that case is they're not going to fund via a US dollar stablecoin. They're going to fund by fiat paid into a gateway company bank account. And so you can attach a contract to that talks about time period and the partial payment and all that. And then what that company should do is take that money and fund broken down work with like a wrapper around it that is like a 15% of the total payment is in the wrapper, and then the rest of the payments broken out into the components. And so if you solve the components, then the wrapper fund is released, and that's sort of an incentive to complete and all that kind of thing, right?
Right. And I think that's a very valuable like role to fill on the network too, right? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people out there that just say, I want a flying car. Like, and that's not an easy thing to build. I mean, it might be an easy thing to build. It's not an easy thing to get a company running around it.
No.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like that's what you're also saying, like the Dreamcatcher company is going to do first, right? Is break stuff down and take the margin.
Yeah, that's what this. So we'd have a gateway company in the UK that was able to process fiat payments, and then it would either take those payments and put them entirely into packets, and then use VC to fund the components, or that company itself would be in charge of breaking down those funds into packets. But that's not really a gateway company at that point. It's a company that starts to have obligations and intelligence within it. So it's, yeah, my preference is there's a big packet, and then the network model kicks in to make sure that packet gets done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then what we can do is sort of like work with the client or the customer as we break work down more. We're like, why don't you defund your primary packet and then move that fund into these broken down packets, because that's better for them as well, like, so you can sort of reduce the load on the VC a bit. Yeah. Anyway, that's sort of where we're at. That's as much as I can figure out. It sort of seems to hang together.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it doesn't seem all that easy to cheese in any way that I've thought of yet.
No. Okay, well, do you want to take a how are you doing for time and stamina and endurance and all those things?
I should probably jump.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, if you take a look at that code base, you can see where I've started to do model-based testing on the contract, which I'm actually super stoked about. So it basically builds a state machine that describes the behavior of the contract. And then the testing library from XState works out every possible path through that state machine and then executes with each state having some expects some assertions about what the state of the chain is at that point to make sure it matches the state of the model. And each time you do an action, it does some on-chain sort of a thing. And so I find this fascinating in that it's not that much to specify all the different actions and states, and then it just computes this wild number of possible paths, deduplicates them, finds the collection of shortest paths that go to every state and every transition, and then executes the test on them. And that's how I've gone about verifying the functionality of the contract.
That's in the test folder?
Yeah, under dreammethod.js.
Okay. Did you ever see, hold on, let me see if I can find this here. I saw this like XState EXL that looked like a lot easier to read than the machine specification for XState.
Is it called Lucy?
Yeah, Lucy.
Lucy.
It is Lucy, yeah. I don't know if it works very well, but it looks a little bit easier to read than machine definitions. No, this is good. This is good. I can I'll grab this and put it into Stately and poke at it. And
I have done it not wrong, but I haven't done it in the way that I want. Like there's too many states and not enough use of context. Right. So I'm going to refactor it to have less states, more context, and then allow it to do more loops to generate test paths. Like make me 5 packets and have 3 appeals and 2 solutions, and then it will actually loop through until it can actually get to those end state conditions, which is a fascinating concept because it's like just declaring what I want the state of the contract to be, and then it just like fucking finds every possible path that it could have arrived there, and then uses that to then start the test on what I want to do. Like I'm actually thrilled with this testing methodology.
Are they like that? Sounds like it's going to be isn't the state of possible inbound or the set of possible inbound states infinite once there's loops?
No, because it uses an algorithm called simple paths. You can also choose the shortest paths algorithm. So simple paths recognizes when it's just doing a loop that's pointless again, and it breaks from that. Plus you can specify like a limit on the number of traversals as well. So yeah, it's got some smarts, like it won't just grind your CPU forever just because one particular path allowed it to loop forever. It'll be like, okay, I found like some solutions here. There's a really good explanation in their repo that's called the Die Hard test, where what it does is it does that, that riddle that they have in Die Hard of like, you've got a 3-liter bottle and a 5-liter bottle. How do I get exactly 4 liters? And the example builds a state machine to represent all the operations you can do in the problem space using context to keep track of how much is in each jug. Okay. And then it runs the test, and the test comes up with, okay, there's only 2 possible paths. There's 2 shortest paths that will give you the correct answer, but there's also 14 simple paths that would give you the answer. So you can go through states that sort of don't make any sense, but they are unique in order to get there.
That's really interesting. That's really
super interesting, yeah. Like, because that's an example where you could imagine the machine ticking over forever. Is it like empty the 3, now fill the 3, now empty the 3, now fill it? Like it could, but so it proves that the path generator has enough intelligence that it can recognize infinite pointless loops.
Right.
Yeah. So no, that's the testing method that I've gone about here. I think it's remarkably thorough for what we're trying to do.
I'm on the docs page already because I'm so like into this idea.
Let me pull up the repo for you then.
Well, I have it on my machine.
Oh, you got the diehard test?
No, I don't have the diehard test.
I'll grab your link there. So yeah, that's the diehard test that I've written. There's some super cool videos and stuff about it too. Like it's just yeah, it's a remarkable way to do testing. I just wanted a good application for it for a long time, and this is finally it.
A problem looking for a solution, or a solution looking for a problem, right? I was wondering, I looked at here and I only saw one hit. I'm like, how did that report all the stuff that you had on the Discord page? But I get it. It's
right?
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Right. It's fascinating. Like it's fascinating. It's like automated generation, not execution. I also finally got around to submitting an issue to XState where I suggested that they run XState on XState. Because I've been meaning to do that for a while. But I don't know if you care to.
What did they say to that?
No one's got back to me. Oh, someone gave me a heart. Oh, the project lead gave me a heart. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, but okay. Haven't had a heart before for any of my comments. They're usually too harsh.
I gotta see this. Is that a boat behind you or something?
Yeah, there's a boat right outside. They like to just toot their horn. Maybe I would too if I had a boat.
Have you played with oh, there's something else. I gotta send you this paper. You'd be super into this.
Yeah.
I don't need to find it here. Have you played with React server components much yet?
No. No, I have not.
Yeah, me either. I'm worried.
Oh, no, wait. Yeah. No, I read about the principle of how they worked, which is basically how you can hydrate them down on the client side after you can hydrate on the server, and then
it's like their answer to server side rendering, right? It's like some shit runs on some components are running on the server and some components are running on the client. Seems confusing to me.
Right.
But
they do come up with great things, man. Like I love hooks. I
actually find some of them confusing. Hooks. Okay, where's this paper? Okay, I'm gonna find it after. It's
alrighty.
I'll look at my phone.
That sounds good. Okay, so where we at then? We're just saying that model sounds good to you for running a dev team. Okay. Cool. I'll keep pushing on with it.
Yeah, let's see if I can find some time to make contributions here too. Yeah, I mean, I took a job for the time being.
Sweet.
So
let me just hold the stream for a bit here.
Okay.